At exactly 3:17 a.m., the deed to a decrepit Brooklyn brownstone transferred ownership. Julia thought handing in her 2 weeks' notice was her ticket out of the Rizzo crime syndicate. She was wrong. You do not quit a man who burns down the world just to keep you warm. The rain in Manhattan felt like a threat, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Rizzo Logistics penthouse. Julia Galley stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the executive suite, a single sheet of high-grade printer paper clutched in her trembling hand. She took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of her pencil skirt over her wide hips. She had always been a woman of substance, possessing curves that drew eyes and a sharp, analytical mind that kept those eyes wary. In the ruthless underworld of the New York Mafia, soft things were usually the first to be crushed. But Julia was not soft on the inside. She had survived 4 years as the executive secretary to the most feared man on the Eastern Seaboard. Tonight, she was ending it. She pushed open the doors. The office was vast, cast in shadows and the amber glow of a single desk lamp. Behind a sprawling desk of black marble sat Gennaro Rizzo. He was a man carved from violence and old-world discipline, the undisputed head of the Rizzo Syndicate, an organization that controlled the ports from Newark to Philadelphia. Gennaro did not look up from the ledger he was reviewing, but the immediate stillness in the room told Julia he knew exactly who had entered. He always knew. Julia walked across the plush carpet, her heels clicking softly. She stopped at the edge of his desk and placed the single sheet of paper squarely over the ledger. Gennaro finally stopped writing. He slowly raised his head, his dark, hollowed eyes locking onto hers. He was a terrifyingly composed man, preferring silence over shouting, calculated strikes over blind rage. He looked at the paper, then back up at her, taking in the flush of her cheeks, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the defiant set of her jaw. "I am resigning, Gennaro," Julia said, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic drumming of her heart. "The 2 weeks' notice is a courtesy. I will have my files organized and handed over to the new hire by Friday." Gennaro did not touch the paper. He simply stared at it, as if it were an offensive object that had materialized out of thin air. For a man who ordered executions over lukewarm espresso, his absolute stillness was infinitely more frightening. "You do not quit, Julia," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "I just did," she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "I am done. I cannot do this anymore. I balance your books, I manage your shell corporations, and I pretend I do not see the blood on the invoices. But the hit at the docks last week was too close. The feds are circling, and I will not go to prison for the Rizzo family. I want a normal life." Gennaro leaned back in his leather chair. His gaze dragged deliberately down her body, lingering on the curve of her waist and the flare of her hips, before rising back to her face. It was a possessive, consuming look that always made Julia feel like she was both the most important person in the room and entirely trapped. He had never touched her, never crossed the professional boundary. But the heavy, suffocating weight of his obsession had been entirely obvious to her for years. "A normal life," Gennaro repeated, tasting the words as if they were poison. "You think you can walk out of this building and go work at a bakery in Queens? You know the routes, Julia. You know the accounts, which is exactly why I am leaving now. Before I know anything more," she countered, tapping a finger on the desk. "You know I would never speak to the authorities. My loyalty to my confidentiality agreement is absolute. But my time here is over." Gennaro finally reached out and picked up the resignation letter. He did not tear it up. He did not crumble it. He folded it neatly, once, twice, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. "Go home, Julia," he said softly. She blinked, momentarily thrown by the lack of resistance. "You accept my resignation?" I said, "Go home. The storm is getting worse, and the roads will flood. My driver will take you." "I can take the subway," she said defensively. "My driver will take you," he repeated, the absolute authority in his tone leaving no room for argument. Julia turned on her heel and marched out of the office, feeling a bizarre mixture of triumph and deep, unsettling dread. She had done it. She had faced down the devil and walked away with her life. But as she rode the elevator down to the lobby, the cold knot in her stomach tightened. Gennaro Rizzo never surrendered. He never let go of anything he considered his. And for 4 years, he had made it abundantly clear that Julia was his. The drive to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, was silent and tense. Julia watched the rain-slicked streets blur past the tinted windows of the Lincoln Navigator. She felt the heavy gaze of Gennaro's driver in the rearview mirror, but ignored it. When she finally reached her apartment building, a rundown pre-war brownstone that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and old dust, she hurried inside, desperate to lock her door against the world. Her apartment was small, cramped, but it was a sanctuary. She threw her keys on the counter, stripped off her wet coat, and made a cup of chamomile tea. She tried to convince herself that she was free, but the shadows in the corners of her living room seemed darker than usual. The real danger was not just Gennaro, and she knew it. It was Roland Kessler. Kessler was a brutal opportunist, a rogue operator who had splintered from a European syndicate to stake a claim in New York. He dealt in weapons and extortion, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. For the past month, Kessler had been aggressively targeting Rizzo territory, trying to disrupt Gennaro's supply chains. Julia knew Kessler was looking for a weakness, a pressure point to bring Gennaro to his knees. As Gennaro's most trusted confidant and the keeper of his financial secrets, Julia was the ultimate prize. It was the primary reason she had quit. The paranoid feeling of being watched had become overwhelming. Hours passed. Julia packed boxes, determined to move out of the city entirely by the end of the week. She was taping up a box of books when the digital clock on her microwave clicked to 3:17 a.m. Her cell phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. She let it ring out. A second later, a text message arrived. "Look out your window." Julia froze. She grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the dining table, her knuckles white, and crept toward the living room window. She peeked through the gap in the blinds, looking down at the rain-swept street below. Parked directly under the broken street lamp were 3 black SUVs. Standing on the sidewalk, uncaring about the pouring rain soaking his expensive suit, was Gennaro Rizzo. Her breath hitched. She backed away from the window, but before she could decide what to do, the heavy wooden door of her apartment rattled. Someone was putting a key into the lock. Julia raised the candlestick, her heart hammering against her ribs. The deadbolt clicked. The handle turned. Gennaro stepped into her apartment, bringing the smell of rain, expensive cologne, and ozone with him. He calmly closed the door behind him and locked it. He looked around her living room, his eyes scanning the packed boxes, before settling on her. He did not look at the weapon in her hand. "How did you get in here?" Julia demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and absolute fury. "How do you have a key to my home?" "It is my home now," Gennaro said evenly, brushing water from his lapel. "What are you talking about?" "I bought this building, Julia." At exactly 3:17 a.m., the wire transfer cleared. I own the mortgage, the deed, and every rat in the walls. You are my tenant now." "You are insane," she breathed, dropping her arm slightly. "You bought an entire apartment building in the middle of the night just because I quit?" "I bought it because you are not quitting, and you are not running," he stated, stepping closer. The air in the small room seemed to evaporate. He towered over her, his presence suffocating. "You think you can pack up your life in cardboard boxes and disappear? You think I would allow you to step outside my protection when Roland Kessler has a bounty on your head?" Julia's stomach dropped. "Kessler? How do you know that?" "Because Kessler's men were sitting in a sedan at the end of your block when I arrived," Gennaro said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I had my men handle them. They were waiting for you to fall asleep so they could drag you out of here and use you to gut my operations." He closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches away. She had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. The coldness was gone, replaced by a burning, violent intensity that terrified and captivated her. "You belong with me, Julia," he murmured, raising a hand to lightly trace the curve of her jaw with a single, calloused knuckle. "You are the only person in this God-forsaken world I trust. Your mind, your resilience, your beautiful, stubborn defiance. I will burn this city to ash before I let Kessler touch a single hair on your head, and I will drown anyone who tries to take you away from me, including you." Julia swallowed hard. The sheer weight of his confession, wrapped in a threat, left her reeling. "You cannot keep me a prisoner, Gennaro." "You are not a prisoner," he replied, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "You are a queen. You just have not accepted your crown yet." Before Julia could formulate a response, the deafening sound of shattering glass tore through the apartment. The living room window exploded inward, raining jagged shards across the hardwood floor. A canister flew through the empty frame, hitting the rug and immediately spewing thick, acrid white smoke. "Tear gas!" Gennaro snarled, wrapping a massive arm around Julia's waist and throwing her to the floor, just as the rapid, rhythmic popping of suppressed gunfire began. Bullets chewed through the plaster walls, showering them with dust and debris. Gennaro covered her body with his own, his heavy weight a sudden, terrifying shield. He pulled a matte black sidearm from his shoulder holster, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled room with lethal precision. "Kessler," Julia coughed, her eyes burning as the chemical smoke filled the air. "He sent a hit squad," Gennaro said grimly, pressing her face into his chest to shield her from the gas. "Stay down. Do not move." The door to the apartment was violently kicked open, the wood splintering off the hinges. Heavy boots crunched on the broken glass. The silhouettes of 3 men emerged through the white smoke, holding tactical rifles. Gennaro did not hesitate. He fired 3 times, the deafening roar of his weapon echoing in the confined space. 2 of the men dropped instantly, clutching their chests. The third returned fire, wildly spraying bullets across the room. A lamp shattered above Julia's head, sending sparks raining down. Gennaro lunged to the side, pulling Julia behind the solid oak overturning dining table. He returned fire, a calculated double tap that caught the third man in the throat. The man fell backward into the hallway, gurgling. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of the gas canister and Julia's ragged breathing. "Are you hit?" Gennaro demanded, his hands roughly checking her arms, her torso, seeking blood. "No, I am okay," she gasped, coughing violently. He hauled her to her feet, keeping a tight grip on her arm. "This location is burned. We are leaving. Now." Julia looked at the packed boxes, her meager life left in ruins, and then at the bodies bleeding out on her floor. She realized with chilling clarity that Gennaro was right. She could never go back to being a normal secretary. The underworld had come for her, and the only man who could keep her alive was the devil himself. The stairwell of the Brooklyn brownstone was a chaotic blur of shadows and the harsh glare of tactical flashlights. Gennaro pulled Julia down the steps, his body constantly shielding hers. Outside, the storm had escalated into a torrential downpour, washing the blood and broken glass down the storm drains. Gennaro shoved her into the back seat of a waiting armored SUV, barking orders in rapid-fire Italian to his lieutenants before climbing in beside her. The vehicle tore away from the curb, leaving her old life burning in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, winding through the industrial labyrinth of Red Hook. Julia stared at her trembling hands, covered in drywall dust and soot. She expected to feel a crushing wave of panic, the kind of hysterical breakdown that women in movies always had after a shootout. Instead, a strange, frigid clarity began to settle over her. She was a woman who solved problems. For 4 years, she had balanced the chaotic books of a criminal empire. She knew how to compartmentalize. She knew how to survive. The SUV pulled into an underground garage, hidden beneath an abandoned maritime warehouse. Steel doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them off from the rest of the world. Gennaro led her into a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse loft. It was a fortress of concrete, steel, and bulletproof glass overlooking the storm-tossed harbor. He dropped his ruined suit jacket on a leather sofa and turned to her. His chest heaved slightly, the only sign of the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Sit," he commanded gently, pointing to a high-backed chair. Julia did not sit. She stood her ground in the center of the room, the adrenaline burning away her fear and leaving only a fierce, defensive anger. "You knew Kessler was going to strike tonight," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I knew he was escalating. I did not know his exact target until my scouts spotted the European muscle circling your block," Gennaro replied, walking to a wet bar and pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Drink. It will steady your nerves." She took the glass but did not drink. "How did he find me, Gennaro? I am a ghost. My name is buried behind 3 layers of shell corporations." Gennaro took a slow sip of his drink, his dark eyes studying her intensely. "Roland Kessler has a rat inside my logistics division. Someone fed him the personnel files. When you submitted your resignation, the system flagged your severance package. Kessler realized my most valuable asset was suddenly unprotected." Julia bristled at the word asset, but she knew it was true. She closed her eyes, piecing the puzzle together. Her brilliant analytical mind shifted into high gear. If Kessler had access to the logistics division, then he also had access to the shipping manifests for the Port Newark terminal. She opened her eyes, a sharp spark of realization hitting her. "Gennaro, I need a laptop. Right now." He raised an eyebrow. "You just survived a hit squad, Julia. You need medical attention and sleep." "I do not need sleep. I need a secure terminal," she demanded, setting the untouched glass of whiskey on a side table. Her curves, usually hidden beneath conservative office wear, were pronounced as she planted her hands on her hips, her posture radiating an unexpected, commanding authority. For a moment, Gennaro just stared at her. The violent, ruthless Mafia Boss looked utterly captivated. He had always known she was intelligent, but watching her transform from a civilian secretary into a tactical asset was intoxicating to him. He walked over to a heavy oak desk and spun a sleek black laptop around to face her. "It is encrypted. Do what you need to do," he said. Julia sank into the desk chair and began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard Rizzo security protocols and diving into the deep, hidden ledgers she had spent years organizing. When I was balancing the books this afternoon, before I came to your office to resign, I noticed an anomaly, Julia explained, her eyes tracking lines of code and financial data. I thought it was just a glitch in the container tracking software. But if Kessler has a man inside logistics, it was not a glitch. It was a back door. She pulled up a sprawling spreadsheet, cross-referencing shipping routes, tonnage, and customs declarations. Gennaro moved behind her chair, leaning over her shoulder. The heat of his body radiated against her back, his spicy, masculine scent cutting through the lingering smell of gunpowder on her clothes. "Look here," she said, pointing a manicured finger at a cluster of highlighted numbers. For the last 3 weeks, a dummy corporation registered in Zurich has been leasing storage space in Section 4 of the Newark terminal. The manifests claim they are importing industrial agricultural equipment. Gennaro scowled. Section 4 is a dead zone. The cameras there have been down for maintenance all month. Exactly, Julia said, turning her head slightly to look up at him. They are not importing tractors, Gennaro. The weight distribution on these manifests is entirely wrong for machinery. It is too heavy, too concentrated. Kessler is not just trying to disrupt your supply chains. He is using your own port to smuggle his heavy artillery into the city. He is staging an armory right under your nose. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Gennaro stared at the screen, then down at Julia. The realization of what she had just uncovered hit him like a physical blow. Kessler had been planning a massive coordinated strike against the Rizzo family, and Julia had just dismantled his entire strategy with a few keystrokes. She waited for him to speak, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. Gennaro slowly reached down, resting his large, calloused hands on her shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding her. "You are a dangerous woman, Julia Galli," he murmured, his voice thick with a dark, reverent awe. "I am a survivor," she corrected softly. "And if Roland Kessler thinks he can blow up my apartment and ruin my life without consequences, he severely underestimated the wrong secretary." Gennaro chuckled, a low, dangerous sound that sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped back, his demeanor instantly shifting back to the ruthless syndicate boss she knew. He pulled a secure phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "Assemble the strike teams," Gennaro ordered into the receiver. "We are going to Port Newark. We hit Section 4 in exactly 1 hour. Take no prisoners." He hung up and looked at Julia. "You will stay here. The perimeter is secured by 20 of my best men." "No," Julia said, standing up from the desk. Gennaro's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I am going with you," she stated, her voice unwavering. "Absolutely not. It will be a slaughterhouse, Julia. You are not trained for urban warfare. I do not need to shoot a gun. I need to open the electronic locks on those specific containers," she countered, tapping the laptop screen. "Kessler encrypted the warehouse doors. If you blow them with C4, you risk detonating the munitions inside and wiping out half of your own men. I have the backdoor access codes. I can open them remotely from the Port Authority control tower while you move in." Gennaro walked toward her, his imposing frame eating up the distance until they were chest to chest. He looked down at her, his jaw tight. "I bought a building to keep you safe. I just killed 3 men to keep you breathing. I will not put you in the crossfire. You cannot protect me by locking me in a glass tower, Gennaro." Julia met his gaze, refusing to back down. "Kessler came for me. He made this personal. Let me help you finish him." He stared into her eyes for a long, tense moment. He saw no fear, only a mirrored reflection of his own ruthless determination. Finally, he reached out, his hand wrapping around the nape of her neck, his thumb stroking the soft skin just below her hairline. "If you step out of this control tower, I will lock you in a vault for the rest of your life," he warned, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Deal," she whispered back. The Port Newark terminal was a sprawling, rusted wasteland of stacked shipping containers, towering cranes, and slick concrete. The rain had slowed to a miserable, freezing mist by the time Gennaro's convoy arrived. Under the cover of darkness, Julia was escorted up the metal stairs of the rusted control tower overlooking Section 4. Two heavily armed Rizzo enforcers flanked the door. Through the rain-streaked glass, she had a bird-eye view of the labyrinth of metal boxes below. She plugged her laptop into the main terminal network. Her fingers were cold, but her mind was fiercely focused. Down below, she could see the shadows of Gennaro and his strike team moving silently between the stacks of containers, closing in on the target zone. Her radio crackled. "Julia, we are in position at the main doors of Warehouse 7. Gennaro's voice came through the earpiece, low and steady. "Copy that," Julia replied, her eyes scanning the security monitors. Bypassing the encryption now, she ran the override script she had hastily written in the car. The progress bar on her screen crawled agonizingly slowly. Through the window, she saw a flicker of movement near the rear of the warehouse. "Gennaro, wait!" Julia said sharply into the mic. "I have thermal signatures moving on the roof of Warehouse 7. It is an ambush. Kessler knows you are here." Before Gennaro could reply, the night erupted in blinding muzzle flashes. Heavy machine gun fire tore from the rooftop, chewing into the concrete where Gennaro's men had been standing seconds before. Julia watched in horror as the shadows below scrambled for cover. She slammed her hands onto the keyboard, frantic. If Kessler was here, he was controlling the warehouse defenses from a localized server. She abandoned the stealth approach and forcefully crashed the warehouse's power grid. The floodlights in Section 4 blew out with a massive shower of sparks, plunging the entire area into pitch blackness. The heavy electronic bay doors of Warehouse 7, no longer held shut by the magnetic locks, slid open by a few feet. Gennaro's men, equipped with night vision, immediately pushed their advantage, flooding into the dark warehouse. The sound of gunfire echoed across the water, a deafening, terrifying symphony of violence. Julia monitored the thermal cameras on the port's backup generator grid. She watched the heat signatures clash and fade as Kessler's men were systematically eliminated. Suddenly, a single heat signature broke away from the main firefight, sprinting out the back of the warehouse and heading directly toward the stairwell of the control tower. Julia's blood ran cold. It was Kessler. Her radio hissed. "Julia, secure the tower door!" "Kessler is on the move," Gennaro shouted, the sound of gunfire heavy in the background. "I am coming for him." Julia turned toward the heavy metal door of the tower. Her two guards raised their rifles, aiming at the stairwell. A moment later, a grenade bounced up the metal stairs and exploded on the landing. The concussive blast blew the steel door inward, knocking the guards to the floor. Through the thick gray smoke stepped Roland Kessler. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, his expensive suit ruined, his eyes wide with desperate rage. He held a heavy Magnum revolver, pointing it directly at Julia. "So you are the fat little secretary who ruined my empire," Kessler spat, stepping over the groaning guards. Julia did not scream. She did not cower. She stood behind the control console, her chin held high, her generous curves clad in her dust-covered pencil skirt, radiating an icy calm she did not know she possessed. "I am the woman who balanced the books," she replied coldly. "And your accounts are overdrawn." Kessler laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "I am going to blow your brains out, and then I'm going to mail your head to Gennaro." He raised the hammer of his revolver. Julia slammed her fist onto the emergency crane release button on the console. Directly above the control tower, an automated cargo crane, which Julia had quietly repositioned during the firefight, released its payload. A 40-ton shipping container plummeted from the sky. It did not hit the tower. It slammed onto the metal catwalk right outside the open doorway, crushing the steel supports. The entire control tower violently jolted, tilting sideways with a sickening groan of bending metal. Kessler lost his footing, stumbling backward toward the open doorway as the floor angled sharply. He dropped his gun, grabbing the doorframe to keep from sliding out into the 50-foot drop below. Before Kessler could pull himself up, a massive shadow filled the doorway. Gennaro Rizzo stood on the crumpled catwalk, his suit soaked with rain and blood, his eyes burning with absolute, terrifying malice. He looked at Kessler dangling from the doorframe, and then he looked at Julia, perfectly safe behind the console. Gennaro reached down, grabbed Kessler by the collar of his ruined suit, and hauled him up just enough to look him in the eye. "You touched my property, Kessler," Gennaro whispered, his voice carrying over the howling wind. "And you insulted my queen." Gennaro shoved Kessler backward. Kessler screamed as he plummeted 50 feet, vanishing into the darkness below. A sickening crunch echoed through the rain, followed by silence. Gennaro stepped into the tilted control tower, ignoring the sparks falling from the ceiling. He walked straight to Julia, pulling her into a fierce, bone-crushing embrace. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply, his massive hands spanning her wide hips, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with emotion. "No," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, finally letting the adrenaline crash. "I am fine. We won." Gennaro pulled back slightly, framing her face with his hands. He looked at her, his eyes shining with a dark, obsessive adoration. "You are never leaving me, Julia. Do you understand? You are mine. You run my empire, you fight my wars, and you sleep in my bed." Julia looked into the eyes of the devil, the man who had burned down the world just to keep her warm. She felt the heavy, undeniable truth of his words. She was not a secretary anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. "I know," she answered, pressing her lips to his. If you were captivated by Julia's brilliant tactical mind and Gennaro's fierce, undeniable obsession, do not let the story end here. Hit that like button to show your support for strong, curvy heroines who outsmart the villains. Leave a comment below telling us what your favorite twist was. Share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our thrilling underworld tales.